"Who are you?" the judge demanded, his voice cracking as he stared at the confident teenager standing calmly before him. The courtroom had fallen into stunned silence, every eye locked onto her, disbelief and confusion etched into their faces. Moments earlier, she'd been mocked, laughed at, dismissed as nothing more than a child playing attorney, but now everything had changed. Who exactly was this mysterious teenager, and how had she just managed to silence a judge known for his condescending attitude? Before we unravel this extraordinary story, I want to take a moment to sincerely thank you for choosing this video. It means a lot. If you're watching this right now, you clearly believe in justice, courage, and the power of standing up against prejudice. If stories like these resonate with you, please consider subscribing to our channel. It costs nothing, but for us it brings us one step closer to sharing more powerful, inspiring stories like this one. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The story started in the quiet suburbs of Chicago, where 17-year-old Maya Brooks lived with her grandmother, Clara. Maya was no ordinary teenager. She had been a child prodigy, reading law books for fun by the age of 7 and debating college students by 12. Despite her brilliance, she chose to keep a low profile, uninterested in the attention that came with her intelligence. Her grandmother, a retired schoolteacher, often reminded her of the importance of humility and using her gifts for good. One day, while helping her grandmother with groceries, Maya overheard a conversation at the corner store. A local single mother, Teresa, was in tears, explaining to the cashier that her landlord was evicting her and her 2 young children. "I don't have anywhere to go," Teresa sobbed. "I've paid every cent on time, but he says I violated the lease. I didn't, I swear I—" Maya's heart sank. She approached Teresa after the conversation and asked her what happened. Teresa explained that her landlord claimed she had too many people living in the apartment. "It's just me and my babies," Teresa insisted. "He's lying because he wants to raise the rent for someone else." Maya's mind raced. She asked Teresa if she had kept copies of her payments and the lease agreement. Teresa nodded and said she had everything stored in a folder at home. Maya felt a spark of determination. "Let me help you," she said firmly. "I think you have a case." Teresa looked at her in disbelief. "But you're just a kid." Maya smiled. "I've been told that before, trust me." Over the next few days, Maya pored over Teresa's documents. The landlord's claims were riddled with inconsistencies. She decided to write a formal letter to the landlord, demanding that he cease the eviction and threatening legal action if he didn't comply. When the landlord ignored her, she helped Teresa file a case in small claims court. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. The teenager who always had her nose in books was standing up for justice. The case caught the attention of local reporters, and Maya's involvement was the headline of every small-town news outlet. But not everyone was impressed. Some questioned her qualifications, and others mocked the idea of a teenager taking on such a serious matter. As the court date approached, Teresa became increasingly anxious. "What if we lose? I don't have money for a lawyer." Maya reassured her, but deep down she knew the stakes were high. This was not just about Teresa. It was about standing up to injustice and proving that age and skin color didn't determine capability. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Spectators, reporters, and even some lawyers had come to watch the child attorney in action. Maya, dressed in a plain navy blazer and skirt, carried herself with a quiet confidence that belied her years. But as soon as she stepped forward to speak, Judge Patterson interrupted her. "And who are you supposed to be?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "I'm representing the plaintiff, Your Honor," Maya replied calmly. The judge chuckled, shaking his head. "You must be joking. Is this a prank?" The room filled with whispers and stifled laughter. Maya stood firm, her expression unchanging. Judge Patterson continued to ridicule her, questioning her credibility and making remarks about how kids these days didn't understand the seriousness of the law. Maya endured it all silently, waiting for her moment to speak. When the opportunity finally came, she presented her case with precision and clarity, citing legal precedents and exposing the landlord's lies. The room grew quiet as she spoke, her words commanding attention and respect. But the moment that left everyone speechless was when she revealed her true identity. Maya Brooks, a certified legal prodigy who had passed the bar exam at just 16, something she had kept secret until now. The courtroom erupted into chaos as Judge Patterson's gavel slammed against the bench. Just as Maya stood tall, poised to deliver the final blow to the prosecution's flimsy arguments, the judge leaned forward, his face pale. "This court is adjourned for a 10-minute recess," he stammered, clearly needing time to process what had just unfolded. Maya's eyes followed him as he retreated to his chambers, and a small smile crept across her face. This was only the beginning. The courtroom buzzed with chatter as the recess began. Spectators leaned toward one another, whispering about the teenage attorney who had just stunned the judge and prosecution alike. Some marveled at her poise, others were skeptical, insisting that this had to be some kind of elaborate hoax. Maya remained seated at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly together. Despite her composed exterior, her heart raced. She had revealed her credentials. A bold move, but it had come with risks. Now there was no turning back. Teresa leaned toward her, her voice barely audible over the noise. "Maya, are you sure we're going to win this? They're acting like you're some kind of fraud." Maya turned to her, voice steady. "They're acting that way because they're afraid. The truth is on our side, Teresa. Trust me." Before Teresa could respond, the bailiff announced the judge's return. The room fell silent as Judge Patterson re-entered, his face an unreadable mask. He took his seat and cleared his throat. "This court will now resume," he said, his voice firmer than before. His gaze shifted toward Maya, but the arrogance from earlier had vanished. "Miss Brooks, the court acknowledges your credentials. You may proceed. But I advise you to tread carefully. You are still representing your client in a very serious matter." Maya stood and walked to the front of the courtroom, her every movement deliberate. She could feel the weight of the stairs on her back, but she blocked it out, focusing only on the task at hand. "Your Honor," she began, "I would like to submit additional evidence that further undermines the defense's claims." She approached the bench and handed the judge a stack of documents, copies of emails between Teresa and the landlord, all of which contradicted his claims about lease violations. Maya had highlighted key phrases in bright yellow, ensuring nothing could be missed. Judge Patterson studied the documents in silence, his expression growing more serious with each passing second. When he finally looked up, he turned to the landlord's attorney. "Mr. Cole," the judge said, his voice sharp, "these emails directly contradict your client's testimony. Do you have an explanation for this?" The landlord's attorney, a middle-aged man with graying hair, hesitated. "Your Honor, these emails could have been fabricated. We would need time to verify their authenticity." Maya didn't flinch. "Your Honor, I anticipated that argument," she said, pulling out another sheet of paper. "Here is the chain of custody for these emails, including metadata verification from a certified digital forensics expert." The courtroom erupted into murmurs again. Judge Patterson's gavel came down with a bang. "Order, I said. Order!" Maya returned to her seat, her confidence unshaken. The judge turned back to the landlord's attorney. "Mr. Cole, unless you can provide concrete evidence to refute this, I will have no choice but to consider these emails valid." The defense attorney stumbled over his words, clearly caught off guard. "Your Honor, we need additional time to review." "Denied," the judge interrupted, his tone icy. "We've already spent too much time on this matter. Miss Brooks, continue." Maya rose again, her voice unwavering as she outlined the timeline of events linking the landlord's actions to clear violations of housing laws. She brought up precedent after precedent, each one reinforcing Teresa's case. At one point, the landlord himself, a burly man with a sour expression, leaned over to whisper furiously to his attorney. Maya noticed, but didn't let it distract her. Instead, she pressed on, her arguments growing more persuasive with each passing minute. But then something unexpected happened. As Maya began summarizing her final points, the landlord abruptly stood up, his face red with anger. "She's lying," he shouted, pointing at Maya. "This whole thing is a setup. There's no way a kid like her knows all this legal stuff." The courtroom erupted into chaos once again. Judge Patterson slammed his gavel repeatedly, his voice booming over the noise. "Order in the court! Sit down, Mr. Reynolds, or I will hold you in contempt." The landlord reluctantly sat, his chest heaving with fury. Maya took a deep breath, maintaining her composure despite the outburst. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "if Mr. Reynolds has any evidence to support his accusations, I invite him to present it. Otherwise, I request that the court focus on the facts." The judge nodded, his expression stern. "Mr. Reynolds, you will remain silent unless called upon to speak. Miss Brooks, you may continue." Maya finished her presentation, her closing remarks delivered with the precision and authority of someone twice her age. When she finally sat down, a wave of relief washed over her. But she knew the battle wasn't over yet. The defense attorney called his next witness, a maintenance worker from the apartment complex who claimed to have seen multiple people entering and leaving Teresa's unit. Maya listened carefully, jotting down notes as the man spoke. When it was her turn to cross-examine, she approached the witness stand with a calm, measured stride. "Mr. Davis," she began, "you testified that you saw multiple people entering and leaving Miss Carter's apartment. Can you specify how many people and when this occurred?" The man hesitated. Maybe 4 or 5 people, and it was a couple of months ago." Maya nodded. "A couple of months ago? Do you remember the exact dates?" "No, not exactly," he admitted. "Did you report this to anyone at the time?" "Well, no," the man said, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "It didn't seem like a big deal then." Maya's lips curved into a faint smile. "So, to clarify, you're unable to provide specific dates or evidence to support your claim. Is that correct?" The man frowned but nodded. "Yeah, I guess so." "Thank you, Mr. Davis," Maya said, stepping away from the stand. As she returned to her seat, she glanced at Teresa, who gave her a nervous but grateful smile. The rest of the day's proceedings were uneventful compared to the earlier drama, but tension hung thick in the air. As the court adjourned for the day, reporters swarmed Maya and Teresa, shouting questions and snapping photos. Maya shielded Teresa as best she could, guiding her through the crowd. Back at home, Maya collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion finally catching up to her. Clara placed a cup of tea in front of her and sat down. "You were incredible today," her grandmother said softly. "I'm so proud of you." Maya managed a tired smile. "Thanks, Grandma. But it's not over yet. Tomorrow is going to be even tougher." Claire reached out and squeezed her hand. "You've got this, Maya. Just remember why you're doing it." Maya nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. For people like Teresa, for everyone who's been told they're not enough. The next morning, Maya arrived at the courthouse early, ready to face whatever came next. But as she walked through the doors, she was greeted by a sight she hadn't anticipated. 2 police officers standing near the entrance, speaking with the landlord. One of the officers spotted Maya and began walking toward her, a grim expression on his face. "Miss Brooks," he said, "we need to talk." Maya froze for a moment, her mind racing. She scanned the officer's expression, searching for any hint of what this confrontation might be about. Teresa, who had been walking a few steps behind her, caught up and immediately sensed the tension. "Is there a problem, officer?" Maya asked, keeping her voice steady. The officer glanced at the landlord, who was smirking smugly from across the lobby. "We've received a report from Mr. Reynolds," the officer said, "alleging that you falsified evidence in this case." Teresa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Maya's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain calm. "That's a serious accusation," she said. "What evidence does he have to support it?" The officer shifted uncomfortably. "We're not here to determine that. We're just doing our due diligence. We need you to come down to the station to answer some questions." The smug look on the landlord's face grew wider. Maya met his gaze, her expression unflinching. "I understand," she said to the officer, "but I'd like to speak with my client and legal counsel before I go anywhere." The officer hesitated but nodded. "Fine. Don't take too long." Maya turned to Teresa and spoke in a low voice. "This is a scare tactic. He's trying to rattle us because he knows his case is falling apart." "But what if they arrest you?" Teresa whispered, panic rising in her voice. "What if they—" "They won't," Maya said firmly. "I've done nothing wrong and they have no proof otherwise. Stay calm and don't say anything to the landlord or his attorney." Teresa nodded reluctantly. Maya then stepped aside and called her grandmother. Clara answered on the first ring. "Maya, is everything okay?" "Grandma, I need you to contact Mr. Harris," Maya said, referring to a family friend who was a retired attorney. "The landlord just made a false accusation against me, and the police want to question me." Clara's voice hardened. "Stay strong, sweetheart. I'll get in touch with him right away. Don't let them intimidate you." "I won't," Maya promised before ending the call. She turned back to the officer who was waiting nearby. "I'm ready," she said. But I want to make it clear that I've done nothing illegal. This is an attempt to intimidate me." The officer nodded but didn't respond. As they walked toward the station, Maya kept her head high, refusing to give the landlord the satisfaction of seeing her falter. At the police station, Maya was taken to a small interrogation room. It was bare except for a metal table and 2 chairs. One of the officers who had escorted her in sat down across from her, placing a tape recorder on the table. "Miss Brooks," the officer began, "you're not under arrest, but we need to ask you some questions about the evidence you submitted in court. Mr. Reynolds claims that it was fabricated." Maya folded her hands on the table, her expression calm. "The evidence I submitted is authentic. I have documentation to prove its validity, including a chain of custody report from a certified digital forensics expert." The officer frowned slightly. "Do you have those documents with you?" "They're in my case file, which is back in the courtroom," Maya replied. "You're welcome to review them." The officer hesitated, then leaned back in his chair. Why would Mr. Reynolds make these accusations if they weren't true? "Because he's desperate," Maya said bluntly. "His case is falling apart and he knows it. This is his way of trying to discredit me and delay the proceedings." The officer studied her for a moment, then stood up. "Wait here." Maya exhaled slowly as the officer left the room. Despite her composed exterior, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of doubt. What if this derailed the case? What if they believed the landlord's lies? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. The officer returned, followed by Mr. Harris, the family friend and retired attorney Clara had contacted. He was an older man with sharp eyes and a confident stride. He gave Maya a reassuring nod before addressing the officer. "I'm here as Miss Brooks' legal counsel," Mr. Harris said. "What exactly is the basis for this questioning?" The officer explained the landlord's accusations, but as Mr. Harris listened, his expression didn't waver. When the officer finished, Mr. Harris leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. "This is a baseless claim," he said. "If Mr. Reynolds has evidence to support these allegations, let him present it. Otherwise, you're detaining my client without cause." The officer shifted uncomfortably. "We're not detaining her." "Then she's free to go," Mr. Harris interrupted. "Unless you're planning to arrest her, this conversation is over." The officer hesitated but finally nodded. "She's free to go, but we'll be following up on this." Maya stood, her confidence returning. "I'll be happy to cooperate within the bounds of the law," she said. As they left the station, Mr. Harris placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. "You handled yourself well," he said, "but be careful. This landlord is playing dirty." Maya nodded. "I expected as much. Thank you for coming." "Any time," Mr. Harris replied. "Now, go win that case." When Maya returned to the courthouse, Teresa ran to her, relief evident on her face. "Are you okay? What happened?" "They let me go," Maya said. "They didn't have anything to hold me on." Teresa sighed in relief, but the tension lingered in her eyes. "What do we do now?" "We stick to the plan," Maya said firmly. "This is just another obstacle. We'll get through it." The hearing resumed that afternoon, but the atmosphere in the courtroom was noticeably different. The landlord sat with a smug expression, clearly expecting the police encounter to have rattled Maya. But as she stood to continue her argument, it was as if nothing had happened. Maya methodically picked apart the landlord's remaining defenses, presenting evidence and calling witnesses who testified to his history of exploiting tenants. The tension in the room grew with each passing minute, and by the end of the day, the landlord's confidence had begun to crack. But just as Maya felt they were gaining ground, another twist threw everything into chaos. As the court prepared to adjourn, the landlord's attorney stood and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, we've just received new evidence that we believe will change the course of this case. We request an emergency motion to introduce it tomorrow." The judge frowned. "What kind of evidence?" The attorney hesitated, clearly trying to make it sound more dramatic than it was. "Financial records that suggest Ms. Carter has been withholding information about her income." The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Maya's heart sank as she glanced at Teresa, who looked utterly confused. The judge banged his gavel for silence. "We'll review the motion tomorrow," Judge Patterson said. "Court is adjourned for the day." As Maya packed up her files, she couldn't shake the sinking feeling in her chest. If the landlord's team had fabricated evidence, it could derail everything. She turned to Teresa, who was pale and trembling. "I don't understand," Teresa whispered. "What financial records? I don't have anything to hide. Maya placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Don't worry, we'll figure it out. But as they walked out of the courthouse, Maya couldn't ignore the sense that the battle was about to get even tougher. And this time, the stakes felt higher than ever. That night, Maya stayed up late in her room, combing through every document, email, and note related to the case. She knew the landlord's team was pulling every trick in the book, but she needed to anticipate their next move. The mention of financial records didn't make sense. Teresa had been transparent about her income, and Maya had reviewed her bank statements herself. Maya's laptop screen glowed faintly in the dim room as she typed out possible arguments and strategies. Her grandmother, Clara, poked her head in, her expression soft with concern. You need rest, sweetheart, Clara said gently. You can't fight this battle if you're running on fumes. I know, Grandma, Maya replied, not looking up, but I need to figure out what they're planning. I can't let them blindside us tomorrow. Clara walked in and placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. You've done everything you can tonight. Trust yourself and trust that the truth will come out. Maya sighed, nodding reluctantly. You're right, she said, shutting her laptop. I'll get some sleep. But as she lay in bed, her mind refused to quiet. What kind of evidence could they possibly have? And how far were they willing to go to discredit Teresa? The next morning, the courtroom was packed again. Word had spread about the landlord's last-minute motion, and everyone was eager to see what would happen next. Maya and Teresa sat at the plaintiff's table, both trying to appear calm despite the tension in the air. Judge Patterson entered, his face as stern as ever. This court is now in session, he announced. Mr. Cole, you may proceed with your motion. The landlord's attorney, Mr. Cole, stood and approached the bench carrying a thick folder. Your Honor, these are financial records that suggest Miss Carter has been receiving income from undisclosed sources. We believe this information is relevant to the case, as it pertains to her ability to pay rent and the claims of financial hardship she has made. He handed the folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Judge Patterson flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing. Miss Brooks, the judge said, looking up, have you had an opportunity to review this evidence? Maya stood. No, Your Honor, this is the first time I'm seeing it. I would request time to review these documents and verify their authenticity. Mr. Cole immediately objected. Your Honor, the evidence is straightforward and should be admitted immediately. Any delay would unfairly disadvantage my client. Maya stepped forward. Your Honor, this evidence was presented at the 11th hour with no prior notice. Given the seriousness of these allegations, it's only fair that we be allowed time to examine it thoroughly. The judge considered this for a moment before nodding. Miss Brooks is correct. The plaintiff will have until tomorrow morning to review this evidence. Court is adjourned for the day. As soon as the hearing ended, Maya and Teresa hurried out of the courtroom and found a quiet corner to go through the documents. Maya's heart sank as she flipped through the pages. The records included bank statements and payment logs that seemed to suggest Teresa had been receiving large sums of money from an unknown source. I don't understand, Teresa said, her voice shaking. I've never seen these before. They're not mine. Maya studied the documents closely, her analytical mind racing. These look official, but something feels off. I'm going to dig deeper. She pulled out her laptop and started cross-referencing the account numbers and transaction details. After an hour of painstaking research, she found the first clue. Look at this, Maya said, pointing to the screen. The account these payments are coming from belongs to a company called Harmony Solutions. Have you ever heard of them? Teresa shook her head. No. What do they do? I'm not sure yet, Maya said, typing furiously, but I'm going to find out. Her search revealed that Harmony Solutions was a shell company with no real business operations. Its listed address was a P.O. box in a distant state, and its website was a single page with vague descriptions of consulting services. Maya's gut told her this company was a front, but she needed proof. Teresa, this could be our smoking gun, Maya said. If we can link Harmony Solutions to Mr. Reynolds, we can prove that these records were fabricated. But how do we do that? Teresa asked, desperation creeping into her voice. Maya leaned back, her mind racing. We'll need help. I'm going to call someone I trust. That evening, Maya met with Aaron, a tech-savvy friend from her neighborhood who had helped her with research in the past. Aaron was a college student majoring in cybersecurity, and he loved a good challenge. Fabricated financial records, Aaron said, raising an eyebrow. That's shady, but if there's a digital trail, I'll find it. Maya handed him the documents and explained what she had discovered so far. Aaron's fingers flew across his keyboard as he began digging into Harmony's solutions. After an hour of silence, he leaned back with a triumphant grin. Got it. Harmony Solutions is registered under a holding company that's owned by, wait for it, your landlord, Mr. Reynolds. Maya's jaw tightened. So he's behind this. He created fake records to frame Teresa. Looks like it, Aaron said. And I've got the digital breadcrumbs to prove it. These transactions were fabricated using template software. Amateur move. Maya smiled for the first time all day. Aaron, you're a lifesaver. Just doing my part, he said with a shrug. I'll send you everything you need. But be careful. Guys like this don't play fair. The next morning, Maya walked into the courtroom with a renewed sense of determination. She had spent the night organizing Aaron's findings into a comprehensive presentation, and she was ready to dismantle the landlord's latest scheme. Maya took a deep breath as she stepped into the courthouse, clutching the case files that could change everything. The weight of the battle ahead pressed on her shoulders, but she didn't waver. She had spent the night preparing, uncovering the cracks in the landlord's scheme, and now she was ready. The courtroom doors swung open. This time she wasn't just defending Teresa, she was fighting for justice itself. But could she truly dismantle the lies stacked against her? Would the truth be enough to win in a system designed to favor the powerful? Find out in Part 2, where Maya takes the stand, not just to argue, but to expose the corruption running deeper than anyone imagined. Don't miss it! Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next chapter of this incredible story. Justice is coming, but the fight is far from over. See you in Part 2.